Staying with Ukraine, on the diplomatic front, the President, Volodymyr Zelensky, is at Downing Street today, meeting the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The French President Emmanuel Macron and the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz are there as well. This amid a flurry of diplomatic efforts to end the war. They've been discussing an American plan that would involve major territorial concessions by Kyiv. Over the weekend, American and Ukrainian representatives held talks in Florida, this without an apparent breakthrough. Well, let's talk then about the meeting in London today with Armen Georgian, our Europe editor. Hi to you, Armen. Does it look like there is something of a plan emerging in London today?
I don't see any distinct plan, Nadia. What I see is EU leaders using kind of very diplomatic gloss to kind of paint over what is actually a gaping chasm between the EU and the US at the moment. We had Emmanuel Macron saying there's a problem of convergence between the EU and the US and the Ukrainians, as if it's some kind of technical issue when it's obviously a huge political hole. And Friedrich Merz talking about the fact that he's skeptical about aspects of the Trump plan. Again, a sort of weirdly polite diplomatic sort of gloss over this massive gap that's opened up between the US and the EU. We saw that, by the way, in the US national security strategy, which we'll come to in a bit. But I don't see, Nadia, I still, after all this time and after all these meetings of the Coalition of the Willing, I still don't see a distinct European plan for what happens if the US really does pull the plug on Ukraine, by which I mean if Trump definitively stops military aid to Ukraine, stops intelligence sharing, withdraws Starlink, satellite services, etc., what does Europe actually do in that situation? I don't see that plan. What I see is them talking about, using perhaps the frozen assets to help Ukraine next year. But even those talks are bogged down. And you could argue that using frozen assets is not actually, it doesn't equate with a clear geopolitical strategy for if the EU really does find itself on its own next year. It could be one component of a strategy, but it's not the whole thing. And we still don't know whether the US is going to be in this whole situation or not, or whether it's going to just completely withdraw, wash its hands of the whole situation.
Armen, for now, thanks very much indeed. Let's look at a related story now. A top official within the European Union has warned that against the United States interfering in Europe's internal affairs. This was the European Council President, Antonio Costa. He spoke out after the Trump administration published its new national security strategy. That text, the American text, criticised migration policy in Europe and paints European allies as weak. Well, Armen, how do you think Europe is sort of reacting to this text from the US?
Well, I think there's a lot of things in that national security document to ruffle the feathers of European leaders. The thing that seems to have really annoyed them is the overt alignment between the Trump administration and far-right parties in Europe. That's what Antonio Costa, the head of the EU Council, and other European leaders have been reacting to. But it really shouldn't be surprising, Nadia, because it's really of a piece with the original Trump 28 plan for Ukraine. That document, you remember, it was that was already a bit of a shock to the Europeans. Perhaps it shouldn't have been, but it was talking about things like, the US will act as a mediator between NATO and Russia, as if the US is not in NATO, as if it's some kind of outside arbiter. And it was also talking about, European fighter jets being stationed in Poland rather than American ones. So really things were clearly going in that direction. I don't think this national security strategy should be a surprise to anyone in Europe. But again, no one really seems to know what to do about it, except saying that they hope that at some point the US will come back to the Europeans, because it's the Europeans who can provide security guarantees on the European continent, etc., etc. But hope is not a plan. Again, I want to emphasize that point. And let's just remember one final thing. When the US negotiating team was in the Kremlin, it actually skipped a stop in Brussels on the way back to the US. It didn't even bother to land in Brussels. They went straight to Florida after being in Moscow. I think that tells you all you need to know about how the US views the European Union at the moment.
All right, Armen